And it started. So welcome everyone. As per usual, this call is falling under the CNCF Code of Conduct. We do take it seriously. Feel free to test it. And today is the 28th of October, 2021, Prometheus Dev Summit. Point of order, welcome Jessica as the newest Prometheus team member, added yesterday. Yeah, welcome. Feel free to unmute, say a few words, or not, both of you.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say a few things, if that's okay. Yeah, so thank you for the invite. It's exciting to be kind of getting more involved in Prometheus. I was just going to do a quick little kind of recap of my background with Prometheus. I started contributing about 1.5 years ago through the Linux Foundation Community Bridge. I think it has a different name now. I was working with Callum and Bartek. We're both leading projects on Community Bridge. So I worked with them primarily. So I was like 2 months. And then after that, we actually converted our weekly meetings into the office hours, the Prometheus office hours that there are today. So yeah, I've continued to attend the North America Prometheus office hours, and then Julian's become really active in that. And yeah, I was working with him, and then also started joining in on the bug scrub with Julian. And so, yeah, that's probably been going on for like 6 months. And yeah, he has kind of helped me sort of like promoting me through the Prometheus world of, he got me on as a maintainer of Prom Tool. And now, you know, he recommended that I be a team member. So yeah, it's been fun getting to work with all of them, and yeah, getting to know you all more. And also I work with Ben in real life. So I feel like I'm at a work meeting right now, except your cat's not here. That's the only thing missing. But
you're also at Reddit?
Yeah. Except Ben and I both started at Reddit pretty recently. So
cool.
Yeah, we're both working on observability there.
Nice. Welcome. Awesome.
The cat's here.
Welcome.
She's just sleeping.
And condolences on working with Ben, but and unfortunately your face is not recorded. Only the speaker is recorded on YouTube. You're missing out. You need to join those calls. Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and welcome. It's super nice to see new members join. For way too long we didn't have anyone join, and yeah, it's super nice to see this happen. So let me see. Yeah, we have Björn. So first real, well, not real, you know what I mean. Also, I think we have 1 or 2 people who haven't been on those calls before. So everyone, no matter if Prometheus team or not, is explicitly invited and encouraged to speak up at any point in time, except for when we have a call for consensus. That's when only Prometheus team members should say yes or no. But at any other point in time, please raise your voice, because we actively want to hear from you. So, PromKL changes for histograms and beyond. For histograms and beyond, I'm just going to hand over.
Okay. I mean, I guess Ganesh and Dieter are also here, partners in crime at the moment. So I guess most of you have followed what's happening in histogram land, and recently I tried to write down thoughts, more or less, like it's not as definitive as a real design doc and not as detailed, how we will utilize the new histograms in PromKL. And I tried to lay out various options and send it out for feedback a while ago. So the most detailed feedback came from Ganesh, who is like very much involved. So I guess this is fairly dense to even get into for people who are not already in it. So the idea is here, I mean, this was on the agenda for a while, or this like where we request agenda items to vote on it in the team. And I always said, let's not discuss it before I haven't even written down the thoughts. So now this is a possibility if you just wanted to ask something, propose something, but you were too afraid to put it in the doc or something. We could do this now, depending on the demand. The idea I have now is mean, eventually we want to have a real design doc, right, where we hammer out like this is why we do it that way, and these are the implementation details. I think we are not there yet, and we kind of plan in the next month to implement like proof of concept, more or less loosely based on the ideas there, but just like not doing the complete thing, but doing a few things, like let's say we implement a rate on a new histogram or something, to also learn from that and inform the real design doc. Like just like essentially, in the end, it would be great if we could run a rate query and draw a heat map from it or something, right? And going down some of the path in the document and learn from it and then write a proper designer. I mean, the ideal world, you just write the full designer before you even write the first line of code. But I think this is just too complicated. We have to explore a bit. And our rationale is that whatever we do, like we can kind of see, we don't know exactly what to do, but we have a like buffet of options. And we want to, if we do serious coding, we want to do coding that is most likely reusable with whatever final solution we go for. Could also be like, this is not all mutually exclusive, right? It's mostly divided into, let's just do it in a way that people almost don't notice their new histograms, or let's fully embrace it and have like a new histogram value type in a way. And we could do both, right? Depending on how this all goes and how useful it is. Yeah, so for now, perhaps that's enough, and we can perhaps open it up for questions or discussions if you have any.
Yes, I have a question. So when you say that the proof of concept will follow, are you planning to publish Docker images or releases, or do you want to do the POC on the main branch behind feature flags?
I mean, so far we are doing all the work in the branch, which where we merge in our main branch now and then. So it should always be easy to merge it all back, but we don't plan to do it. Like we have no like ETA when we want to merge this, and we don't. I mean, this is so proof of concept that I don't even want to think about how we could. I mean, perhaps it's possible to gate this behind feature flags, but this would just slow us down at the moment. And I think it's so early that we don't even want it to be available. I mean, this is later. I think this would be great to make it easily available for everyone, right? To say it's in there, flip this feature flag and you can use it. But for now, we really want to just do it like bleeding edge development. And of course, if people want, they can try it out, check out the branch, build it. But I want this, I would expect the target audience are people who have no problem whatsoever to just check out the branch and build it themselves, right? Well, I think the people who need the Docker image to try it out, they might also not be ready for this bleeding edge code, especially because we really do like very partial implementation. Like so far, like for example, until very recently, if you ever ingested a stale marker, it would just all crash. We fixed that by now, but this was really what we said initially. Yeah, we just don't ingest stale markers because we just want to try out things. Like the thing where we had the tweeted heat map, that was still in that stage. And I'm more in this, like until we have a proper design doc, I would not even aim for more than that. But yeah,
Well,
if you have different opinions, let me know.
Well, I am saying that because, like, I think that there are people outside of the Prometheus world and Prometheus development, like the people from OpenTelemetry, that might benefit from easy access to the POC without needing to learn all the Prometheus build system, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I had a lot of discussions in a issue or pull request with OpenTelemetry, and they, of course, they want us to tell them this is how it will work out exactly, right? So they can adjust to it. I mean, which is good. They really want to adjust to it and make it possible to play well with each other. And I mean, I just honestly said maybe it works that way, but we really can't say at the moment. And on the other hand, like a lot of ideas. I always had this basic thought that it should be adjustable enough what we do in Prometheus that we can easily, let's say, if there's a DD sketch that somebody has from Datadog and they want to put this data into their Prometheus. It's not possible right now, but it's all similar enough that it's thinkable that we can create a way of doing this. So it's kind of also the other way around. But yeah, I mean, the hotel discussion kind of went in a way. In the end, they kind of started to not do the few things where I was fairly confident we will do them that way. But on the other hand, they really wanted to know, like, okay, are you doing it that way? And then, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think it's all generally so related that I don't see a lot of friction in the future, but it's also really hard to commit now to, yeah, I mean, again, it would slow us down, right? If we now commit to do it in the way X, and then we have to, at least we will try to do it that way, even if we should actually decide it the other way. That's why I think it's really, really early stage. On the other hand, I was always very like, I don't know when this will be ready, but now I'm way more confident that this will not take like an infinite amount of time. Like I could see a working proof of concept within the next 3 months. And once we have that, then it's also very easy to pull in more people for implementing the final, like sketch out all the details. So I could then see that within a few months, we can give a timeline when this will end up in a real Prometheus release, and when we can kind of soft commit to this will not change drastically and all those things, right? But I don't think we should do it right now. We should perhaps do it, yeah, like in a couple of months or something. Think about that.
But that means that in theory, we can just add a build target for that branch, have a location for a binary, and basically make it easier for people who want to try whatever the current state of the art is, with low barrier. And
yeah, but then they also need to they need a Go application because only the Go implementation library supports it, or they do their own thing based on the protobuf definition, blah 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 blah. They need to Go module, whatever, what's described, like go get the pin version of client Golang.
Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
Don't we have an 80-20 way to make it easier to basically play with this without tying anything down, and basically maybe have a markdown file where it just explained currently you need to pin to this and that version or what have you. Give some URL for download and done.
Yeah, I just, at the moment, I think we actually need like the most useful people to play with this are people who are really deep into it anyway. And this is why I think if we now make it super, like have this instructions how to do it, if you don't know anything else about Prometheus, we might just get people involved that just get disappointed and can't provide a lot of feedback, which I think will quickly change, right? The moment we are a bit further down the road, we should definitely make it very simple, but that's perhaps also where we just have it beyond the feature flag and people can just, yeah, switch it on. My opinion, right? Matthias wanted to say something.
As for like having an example binary, do the metrics that Prometheus itself exports actually include histograms? And does your branch build against your version of the client library? Can it be its own example?
Good question. We could do that. I think it's not doing that right now, interestingly.
Because I mean, I do see the value in, even for like people who are into metrics and care about histograms, right? To be able to go, oh, here's a thing I can try out. Let me download this binary, /Prometheus, config equals example.yaml, and go. Right?
Yeah.
And if
let's totally do this.
If we make it scrape itself, it would be all there.
Yeah. Let's totally do that once we have this full, I call it full stack, right? Where you have all the way from instrumenting the thing to seeing a heat map or calculating a 99th percentile or something. Once we have this, let's do it, right? But right now, you can't even do that, right? You can't query the histogram. The thing that we did for the tweeted thing was really hack it, do a hard-coded thing where we just spit out a rate of the histogram in a super weird way. and format it as a conventional histogram and send it to Grafana, which then crashes your browser because it's so inefficient. Yeah. So I guess once we are there, and this also I'm also discussing with Grafana developers how this has to be done in Grafana, because that also has to play with it, right? You need, if you want to graph it, if you just want to calculate a 99th percentile, that's all good once the PromKill support works. But if you really want a heat map, then you need a graphing front end that just the heat map thing, which also leads to perhaps we should have mini heat maps in the Prometheus, like in the own Prometheus UI, right? That's in the document, but that's again a goodie for later.
I just want to say something that you don't need to reinvent the wheel, because for the exemplars, Grafana Labs already had an example application with an example Grafana, an example Prometheus that did support the exemplars, and it was like a bundle that you could just install and just test wherever you want. So I think that just adjusting that to use the
that
version.
was my plan anyway. That's the TNS app, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, TNS for
the new stack.
Public here, TNS is the new stack. So this is for the new stack. There was a podcast episode or something where we created an example app, and ever since we used this app, like it's a Hacker News clone or something with ridiculous news. And ever since we put all the bleeding edge features into this thing, like exemplars were also in there before they were even released, so you could play with it. And that's definitely something I had in mind, to put all in there so people could just play with that, which is also something that like Grafana employees like to demo at conferences. So that would be pretty close to click this button and see it live. But again, this is only even possible once we have a query path.
Yeah, currently there's no querying ability whatsoever. We just have the scraping and the instrumentation and the storage in TSDB. There's no way to query it right now.
Yeah. So ideally, what I would go home with, I'm already home, but you know what I mean, today is that if you haven't seen the document, you know now that it exists. And if there are any ideas that should be in the document but I missed, or if you think some of the ideas listed here have flaws that aren't discussed, that would be great to know, so that, yeah, we don't work on something where we then realize, oh, that could never have worked from the beginning.
This idea of like providing an example stack for people, maybe that makes more sense once we have querying, or a prototype of querying.
Yeah, this is perhaps, I mean, I think this meets everything that was said about it, right? Just having a very easy way to download this, run it, and play with it. And then you have all the code because it's all open source, so you can then go on from there if you want to try this out at home. And the TNS app has it worked well for the exemplars to demonstrate that. And it's, by the way, it's using the Weaveworks framework, which is also used by others, right? So we usually patch the Weaveworks thing for the stuff we show in TNS, and often this is merged, like it's anyway half maintained or more than half maintained by Grafana. So this is usually in that tool anyway, then pretty soon.
The other aspect of the whole thing is how to, like we were just saying, once we have querying and such, and part of this point is discussing directions for how or where to go with extending PromQL. I don't know who read the document by Björn, because that is probably kind of a prerequisite for a deeper discussion. We can also try and have like a super high level summary.
Yeah, I mean, there are also grayed out parts, which is kind of thoughts that fit fit in there, so I put them down, but they are out of scope of the immediate histogram thing. And the last like gray box in the end is essentially something that was in my mind for a long time, which goes into this whole direction of having a more strongly typed PromQL, which is basically an idea we had in the very early moments of the project, where we said, so why do we know this is a counter and this is a gauge, and still we can just rate the gauge and nothing happens, right? Or we can aggregate the counter, and Prometheus just doing it, although it's nonsense. And that's goes into this direction, but I think I deliberately want to keep it out of the histogram development per se, but it just points to essentially once we do it for the histograms, it will be actually a much smaller step to utilize the same ideas to come to a, type safe. PromQL is type safe, but it's a different type dimension. It's also explained in the document, right? There we have range vectors and instant vectors and scalars and strings, and like those are all strong types, but the value is for us just the one float value, right? And this dimension hasn't been open yet, that it could be a gauge or a counter or even a whole histogram with like pockets and everything. And the histogram could be a gauge histogram or counter histogram. That's also a thing. And this is, by the way, something we already know in the prototype we save, right? We have a flag. So the TSDB, for the first time, knows, is this actually a counter thing or a gauge thing? And this is, again, something that, we came up with because counter reset detection is more expensive. So why not save it in the TSDB and not try to find out every time anew? And then you realize you could do the same thing with normal counters and gauges and save the counter resets, or save the property of this is a gauge, it doesn't have counter resets, and by the way you cannot write it, and all those things. Like one thing, it's all connected. But again, we don't need to discuss this now. It's just like an interesting pointer that there are small waiting for a glorious future of PromQL, perhaps. If it turns out it's useful. I think so. But we don't have to decide it now. Yeah.
So not having read the document in detail, but it seems to me the main branching point is basically, do we stay compatible, or is this new functions, new metric type, everything new?
By the way, I should say that initially I expected for the pathway of having a new value type that it would actually be a breaking change to PromQL. And by now I think it actually isn't. Like, I think you can implement it in a way that all the existing PromQL still works as it did. And only if you want to deal with the new histogram, you use like newer functionality. And so the whole thing with the compatible and non-compatible would be, in the compatible way, you could still use like the histogram quantile function in the same way as before, with like maintaining the LE label and everything, which would be more like, there's no LE label anymore. We just pretend it's there, so you can use the same weird query, although the kind of native histogram query would look way easier. But yeah, so this is also something where I think things are actually easier than I thought, that we can do the native approach, I believe, without breaking any existing PromQL.
But I would not be able, like, what would the upgrade path be for someone who has like different exporters, different applications? Would we need to make all applications export an old and a new histogram?
You could do that. I mean, this is going into details now, right? I think you could even do it that way. At the moment, the ingest code, if you expose both, it would just ingest the new histogram and ignore the old one. So that you expose both. So an old Prometheus can ingest the old histogram, and new Prometheus the new histogram, but the Prometheus wouldn't do both. But we could, of course, if that's the upgrade path we want, we could do it that way. So we have both histograms in the TSDB. It's in principle not like it should be easy. And then you could, whenever you aggregate some, you could essentially decide, do you want to aggregate the old histograms or the new ones? But I don't know how useful that would be. We can think about it. Perhaps it's also possible to just say, okay, we just upgrade first all our targets to expose both, and then we flip the switch on my Prometheus server, so now it has the new histograms.
I mean, from experience, you will never update all targets. Like that's kind of the reality we had at SoundCloud, is that we had like the old JSON format, like 4 years after Prometheus 2 was released.
The new Prometheus server will always be able to ingest the old histograms if only old histograms are exposed, right? That will always work. It will just work in the old way. I mean, unless we, in some future release, intentionally want to drop the support. What I think is the only friction, if you have a few targets of the same service that still expose the old ones and a few targets that expose the new one, and now you want to aggregate them together, right? That would be something, if we want to support that, then we need to ingest both histogram types at the same time and have them in the TSV in parallel, so that whenever you have a pure old histogram in the mix, you just use the old histogram. This is something we can flesh out. But if you just have an old service that has never been updated and uses the old histograms, sure, this will always work, and you just do it the old style, and your new services that use the new histogram do the new style. I mean, but
then that means I still have to then know which kind of function to use. So it would be explicit in that way.
Yeah, again, that depends on the detail. The way I think, I mean, there are different options in the document. The way I think, or I hope it will work out, you would use the same functions, and it would just act on different elements in the vector in a different way. It's a bit different for histogram quanta, because for the old style, you want to keep the LE label, and the new style, they don't even have LE labels. So this is where you would notice. But for example, if you rate, of course, you also notice, because in the old histograms, you rate buckets, and in the new one, you just rate the whole histogram. So yeah, I mean, if we do the native thing, you kind of handle them differently. And this is where the part one thing, right? This whole compatibility thing would come into the game, where you could treat the new histograms in the same way as the old ones, which is, I think, a nice feature, but I also think it has many ramifications. So this is a trade-off we have to decide, right?
Yeah.
And where I also think we could do both, like we could offer this, it's not mutually exclusive, so we could offer this kind of compatibility feature if we want to, if it's a feasible thing.
So I am wondering, do you actually plan to update the text format instead of, and is the new histogram stuff compatible with OpenMetrics? Because I feel like adding the text format would be painful, and not being OpenMetrics compatible would be also painful for the community.
That's a very good question. So the protobuf format, I'm just using it because it supports, not by coincidence, but by design, exactly the optimization tricks that we need, which is like var-int encoding and all those things. It's good with a lot of numerical data. We didn't have a lot of You want to say something, Julian?
Yeah, to clarify, is it the OpenMetrics protobuf format, or is it a new one?
So what I did, I just extended the old protobuf format, because that's what Klein Golang already supported. So essentially, it was super easy to make Klein Golang support the new histograms. That was the only reason. And I said, as long as this is just an experiment, we don't care, right? So I don't need to invest a lot of time of more or less completely rewrite Klein Golang to work with OpenMetrics natively. I mean, we have OpenMetrics support, but it's very incomplete and kind of tucked on top of everything. But I don't expect that this is the way to go. This is just to do the proof of concept, right? So there's actually a lot of work to do. We have to first find out, is there perhaps a good way of representing this in the text format, which has like those things? Should it be efficient? Should it be human readable? A lot of trade-offs. should we, and in the end, of course, we want something open metrics, which might, I mean, my current gut feeling is we might end up with the next version of open metrics kind of lifting up the status of the protobuf a bit more. And maybe it's so inefficient in the text format to do this that you could say for proper histogram support, you need protobuf. I don't know. In some way, you can always put it in text format, right? It might just not be very efficient, and then we could support that it at least works. But yeah, I mean, this is a lot of decisions that I also like don't necessarily feel qualified. We have to do it in some way, right? And definitely, the only thing I know is that the way we do it now in the proof of concept is definitely not the one that we will end up with. Yeah, so I guess it could be the production industry strength use case might just be a open metrics protobuf that incorporates the sparse histogram, and then perhaps we can have it in the text form in some way that is good enough so it works for normal use cases, but you feel kind of incentivized to use protobuf. But this has to be explored.
I'm not certain we can choose if we want to support both at the same time. Just to jump back quite a bit in that, because I think we must support both old and new histograms at the same time, because else we will make it extremely hard for customers to migrate from what they have onto the new system. I'm also not convinced that they will be able to switch over everything, at least not in the common case. As to open metrics, with my open metrics hat on, we've said at release time or even before that high resolution histograms is basically the excuse to release a 2.0. So that's actively being planned for. That this is what bumps the major version of open metrics. In anticipation of this needing something which is not currently doable in the current format. Basically,
From the also going back to the compatibility, like from a practitioner's standpoint, like the fewer things are tied together and have to happen at the same time, the easier it is to migrate, but the longer the whole thing drags out. Like, I mean, ideally, if I just update the client if I update client Golang somewhere, that doesn't invalidate an expression somewhere down the line. If I maybe I can ideally I can then start rewriting my expressions before I have even updated my client Golang, because we like if we take it both ways, and that would make things a lot easier, but also just take longer to get to the end state where everything is upgraded.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you the kind of new native histogram expressions, they will never work with the old ones, right? That's why we use new histograms, because it doesn't work that way, right? But everything else you can, I mean, yeah, upgrade path and what flags to set one and what have to be fleshed out. But this is everything else is technically no problem. We just have to decide how fine granular we want this upgrade process to be smooth. Like, do you have to update at least one service at a go, or do you really can have like a new and an old instance, and then you can still use all the old histograms as long as you want, and then once all instances are new ones, you can use the new ones or something. This is all, yeah. I mean, I don't see a problem. It's just we just have to pick and some find the best trade-off, which is least confusing and which is feasible work-wise.
One thing where we maybe should try and get consensus on is if we think that we must support both at the same time, or if we think that we can have a hard cutover.
Then you have to define what you mean at the same time, right?
in the functional widest sense that a Prometheus is able to ingest both old and new style histograms and do useful things with both old and new style histograms. Not necessarily merge them in any useful way, but at least deal with both of them in the same binary at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's nobody disagrees with that. But at
Okay,
the
I
same
wasn't
time,
certain. That's okay.
At the same time, this is why I mean you have to define at the same time. It could mean if there's one and the same target. I mean, this is how it works now, right? You just configure the new histograms and you configure the old ones, and the target exposes both. And currently, the Prometheus goes along. If it's an old Prometheus, it just ignores the sparse histogram part. If it's a patched Prometheus, it only ingests the sparse histogram. But you could, it's easy to say ingest both, right? That would be the strongest definition of at the same time. Well, a Prometheus right now from the sparse histogram branch, if it encounters a target that only exposes the old histogram buckets, it ingests them just fine. Everything that worked before still works, histogram quantile with LE and everything. And if it encounters a target that exposes both, it only ingests the new one. And this is where we could go even further and ingest both. And then you can pick by saying underscore bucket or not, which part you're addressing. Details have to be fleshed out. This is why it's a bit different at the same time, right? One and the same binary, I think, will always support both ways. Just on the same target, have them both ingested in parallel. I mean, at least that should be configurable because you don't want to ingest the old ones if you are not using them, because they are expensive to ingest.
It might be useful to clarify, and Bjorn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have not found any reason why we would not be able to support both histograms at the same time. So in all of our presentation, we have not stumbled upon any reason why we would not be able to support both at the same time. So just in case anyone had that concern, it's not like there's any inherent incompatibilities or anything like that.
I mean,
the only reason, yeah,
you cannot really merge them together, right? But the users of the old histogram are used to that if they upgrade their binary and have a different bucket layout, that they cannot aggregate them. So that's not like a huge difference.
I mean, an even stronger at the same time would be different instances of the same service or like of the same metric. Some targets have new histograms, some targets have old histograms. Right? This will inevitably happen when you do a rolling deploy for some period of time. That would probably be acceptable. I mean, we just like don't see. But for example, we definitely have like the same metrics consistently across a wide range of services, and we will never be able to deploy all of those at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, if you want
but
to,
it might also be okay to say we can't aggregate them.
Like we have some histogram in all of your binaries, and you want to aggregate across all of your binaries based on that histogram, then you need something where you ingest both, or you flip the switch on the Prometheus side, right? You just refuse to ingest the new histograms on from a metric and flip the switch, or we do it in a way that Prometheus ingests both at double the cost, then of course, and then you can always use the old histograms for everything, or use the new histograms for only the targets that have the new histograms. It's all possible. This is really just a design choice. There's nothing prohibitive. Like there's nothing like the other way around. Like if you want to use the new PromQL that supports native histograms and use them on old ones, I don't think that will be feasible to implement. But everything else, I don't see any trouble doing this.
Can we at ingestion time see this is type histogram and then interpret it as like just a very verbose and not very sparse text format of the new histograms.
Can you say that again?
So if we have a new Prometheus that understands sparse histograms, it's going to have some form of understanding text formats that have sparse histograms. Could it just see, oh, this is a type histogram, and then pick it apart, reinterpret it as a histogram, and ingest it as a new sparse histogram into the storage?
So natively, I mean, at the moment, not, because we have strict requirements for the bucket boundaries in the new histograms, which will almost never coincide. So you could interpolate, but also that's also written in the doc. I think you can, that's the plan we have. You could define new schemas for the new histograms that allow custom bucket boundaries. And then you would lose the perfect mergeability ability, but you could then perfectly emulate the old histograms with the new technology. And that's in the first grade out box, right? Where you could essentially, as for example, if you offer a service for Prometheus and you see that 80% of your series are just histogram buckets, you could save a lot of resources by behind the scenes, use the new histograms to save all those conventional histograms and completely transparently make it completely transparent to the user. They won't notice that. That's a possibility. That needs a lot of work, I guess, but it's completely, I don't see, again, I might be mistaken, but I don't see any problem with that implementation-wise. You just have to do it. And that's why, like, a schema encoder, which is just a number, and so far it just is the resolution, but there's a lot of space in that, whatever, 1 byte schema identifier where you can say, okay, 42 means it's a custom bucket layout, and then there are so many bytes to define those custom bucket boundaries, and they happen to be the boundaries of an old histogram, but it's using all the tricks in the new histograms, saving just 1 series per histogram and everything. And then we emulate it all back. You could do that, right? We perhaps you don't want to, but we could do it, emulate it all back. So from PromQL, it looks like exactly like before.
I think we're relatively deep in the technical details without much to find consensus on currently. I realized there's one thing which we didn't consider. We have versioning. Even if we have a Prometheus exposition format 005, but also we have, like, it shouldn't be the case that we see the same 2 different histograms from one target at the same time. Of course, we can simply mandate that this is not possible and that we don't need to deal with it. Do we have something where we should have a call for consensus? Because I feel there's not much.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, for me, it would be great to just know if any of you have ideas that are not reflected in the document, but they should, or you find you have concerns that are not addressed in the document, but they should. That would be just good, so that, I mean, we don't decide anything right now, right? We want to just write proof of concept code that is highly likely to be needed anyway. We want to gather experience, how, like, querying works, also benchmarking, right? I mean, the worst outcome would be, oh no, this like what we store now on the TSV is super expensive to query. It would be surprising, but all of this are lessons to learn. And then based on that, in like 2 months time, we might sit here and come to consensus calls. Yeah, what to implement first and in which way and stuff like that. So I think it's not about deciding, it's more about, like, yeah, request for comments essentially.
I just see one use case where it would be useful to deal with both the new and the old one for the same target, if the remote write does not support the new histograms. Then they might want to ingest the old buckets. I don't know if that has been taken into consideration, or if you have even been in touch with Chronosphere or PromScale, which do not use the same data model as Prometheus, and would need to redo all the development to support the sparse histogram in an effective way.
Yeah, Yes, of course, like all the remote write providers that are heavily tied to the Prometheus code base, for them it will be easy, and for everyone else it will be very hard. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we just, as said, right, I think technically no problem to ingest them both. Luckily for histograms, there isn't even a name collision, because all the stuff in the conventional histogram is named differently from the actual metric, which is different from summaries. But yeah, if we want it, if we have enough reasons, we can just do it. And this is the fact that the current sparse histogram branch Prometheus is just picking the new one if it's there, and using the old one if the new one is not there, is like, yeah, it's just one line of code where it decides, no, I don't ingest this, and it would be very easy to do it differently. It's actually like there's no decision yet how to nicely put exemplars into the new format. So for now, and this might not be the stupidest thing, the exemplars are just conveyed in the normal format, because the bucketing, the fixed bucketing, is actually good heuristics for which exemplars I want to see. And so the Prometheus is essentially, if you have a conventional histogram with exemplars and a sparse histogram, the current sparse histogram Prometheus would still pass the conventional part just to get the exemplars. So it ingests the new histogram but gets the exemplars from the old part. So that works, right?
I'm wondering if, like, for anyone who relies on Prometheus Remote Write 1.0 or something, as long as we keep proper versioning, we should be able to just emit what is being requested. It doesn't matter if it's OpenMetrics or Prometheus Remote Write. And as long as the client library, if it's being scraped with an old Prometheus, and that case needs to be handled anyway, has a way to basically align the high resolution histograms with a few more or less arbitrary bucket boundaries, we can always emit the correct data and not have any of the overhead, which we're currently considering. Like, if your pipeline is version 1.0, then it's 1.0, and you only get the old stuff, and it's less efficient, but it works, and we don't need to do any extra work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, how to do remote write with the new histograms is also, I guess, still a lot of work to do. And this is
That's
again
not the
where I
point.
don't.
The point is, we don't have to solve this for the new Prometheus Remote Write with both at the same time. We don't have to, if we just decide that we do not support both histogram types through a single scrape at the same time, then we can just say so. If we say that we don't ever support the new histograms through the old Prometheus Remote Write, then if you want to transport this over Prometheus Remote Write, then you simply need to update all parts of the pipeline which speak Prometheus Remote Write. And we don't have to take so many things into account. If you have an old version anywhere, you lose functionality, and once you have upgraded everything, you have the new and shiny stuff.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I said, right? This is, I think, a decision that we don't need to make that decision now. It doesn't change anything for the current plans for getting like a working proof of concept. And whatever we do now, nothing blocks the one or the other option later. That's why I think, I mean, it's interesting to discuss now, but we don't have to find a consensus now. Okay. So should we leave it there, and you all should feel encouraged to look at the document, and if you have some ideas or concern, raise them in a comment, and yeah, we'll just work on proof of concept code for the time being.
Okay, thank you, Bjorn and Dieter and all the other people involved in that work. Should we take a 5-minute break then until 5, and then we go for the second part of the Dev Summit?
Yes, then I can eat my supper.
Okay, then see you in 5.
Yeah, see you.
Ding, 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 ding. Anyone hearing this is welcome to switch their cameras back on so we know if you're here. I think that's everyone who had their cameras on. No, Frederick. We also lost a few people. Okay. See you, Frederick. Good, good. Let's continue. Jörn, clarify when to use feature flags. Should I summarize?
You good?
You're still chewing. I can also, if you want to.
That's okay. I think I win the competition for the most popular agenda items. So we introduced feature flags, right? And everyone knows feature flags, but of course, inevitably, now we have to discuss when to use feature flags and if we should just use them like whenever we want, liberally, or should we actually have some rules when to not use them? And I mean, my own gut feeling was just use them, go wild, use them whenever we think anyone thinks we should use them, and don't be afraid. But Julian said we don't want to have too many of them, and we had a little discussion, and I thought this might be a good topic to get like a group view on this and not just let the two of us discuss it. And I don't know if should we summarize the discussion, or are you aware what happened? We can click on the link. I can try to give a summary.
I mean, the super high level summary is maybe that Julian is concerned that as we keep using feature flags, that we might have just an endless, more or less required list of feature flags which you need to carry in your configuration. Whereas Björn's point is that by putting most anything into behind feature flags, we are a lot more flexible in introducing and also removing things.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of want the feature flags to avoid endless discussions, like to essentially introduce a feature before we have finally discussed if we want this feature. But now we might just delegate this discussion to do we want the feature flag? Yeah.
My own thinking around this is historically, and this largely mirrors Björn's point, we were super slow and super reluctant in adopting much anything, and even more reluctant in changing anything which we ever introduced. So feature flags solved a hard and real problem for us and for our users. As such, I wouldn't want them to see them go away. On the other hand, Julian is right that it's kind of silly to have 10,000 feature flags. My gut is, can we just agree that we review all feature flags every 6 months, every second minor release, every I don't know, to try and basically clean them up or confirm that we still want this behind a feature flag and cannot lift this out of feature flag and just bless it as something which is now Prometheus and doesn't need the flag anymore.
I mean, this is the beauty of feature flags, right? You can write whatever you want. They don't error out if you put a flag there that doesn't exist. So you can, if you introduce something behind a feature flag, and then within weeks you realize this is great. We just put it in main, and it's not experimental and whatever. then you just remove the feature flag, but whoever still uses it wouldn't notice, and whoever was never interested in it just gets the new feature. Like there's very little cost in introducing a feature flag that goes into the main, like into whatever, the supported realm. While for features that are actually breaking and which we put behind a feature flag to avoid a breaking change, of course we are stuck with it. But I think that's also the case where we all agree that we want a feature flag, right? I
disagree on one point, that it doesn't matter if you carry over old feature flags. It adds to just cargo culting, and in particular, newer users tend to just copy whatever they find on Stack Overflow. And it adds mental overhead for people to check, hey, is this feature actually enabled? They might not be comfortable removing a feature flag, which might break something, and feel forced to always carry this huge string. But in between a cadence of when we need to review feature flags, if we can bless it, so we aggressively clean them out, and B, maybe having a little bit of tooling around, hey, on startup, by the way, you're using an old feature flag, you can safely remove this, and also have the same, I don't know, maybe as an info metric or in a status screen or on the config screen or something, or all of them, like in between, giving users concrete advice on, hey, you can stop using this, and us trying to remove them as early as we realistically and safely can. I think we can actually address and cover both Julian's and Björn's intentions in full.
I mean, Julian has to speak for himself, of course, but my impression was that he is more for a smaller application area for feature flags. While I thought we have actually very different ideas why we need feature flags and why not support all of them.
Well, my idea was that we should not require feature flag for every experimental feature, and that was my main point, that some things we know are not really intrusive in the code and we know we want to keep them, but the behavior might change a little, like maybe the way that we error out, that kind of things might change. And that's why I've done with the script interval relabeling, that like currently it's marked experimental, there is no feature flag. You need to use the feature so that you need to expose those actual labels so that they are actually changing the behavior of Prometheus, but we might change the way that we error out in the future. That's why I kind of did not make a feature flag for that. And that was more my point, that when I read what Björn was saying at the beginning, it was like that we would need feature flag for everything that we consider experimental, but that's where I did disagree actually.
Yeah, I mean, that was the line of discussion where I said, of course, I mean, I wanted to be as liberal as possible, so I don't want a fixed rule that if something is experimental, it must be behind the feature flag. I also think that's not always possible, but that's a different thing. But then I thought features you might just use accidentally, and this all started with the A10 operator or function, where I thought this is people just see this in the autocomplete and use it, and they are not even aware this is an experimental feature. And then in the next Prometheus version, we change some tiny bits, and then we break them, and they weren't even aware that they used an experimental feature. Yeah, but then, of course, we end up in this situation where now we have to decide, is it appropriate to do it or not? Yeah, that's why I think it would be good if we just write down guidelines when to use feature flags and when not.
I would be somewhat worried of introducing a policy, as in write a guideline, because as per usual, policies are super easy to introduce in a moment and super hard to get rid of in half a year when no one is certain if we really need it or not, but better be safe and retain it. As we usually only add stuff behind feature flags, which we talked about during the Dev Summit, I think it's fair to just say that we have consensus on using a feature flag in that particular case, but we don't require it in any other cases. but basically by making certain that feature flags go away quickly, I think that's part of implicitly trying to address Julian's point of making them lightweight in as much as getting rid of them quickly, and making lightweight in Björn's sense, that we can introduce them quickly when we want to. And we don't just introduce them just so. We always have a consensus that we want a feature flag, or we do it in main.
I don't think we should want to have them removed quickly, because most of them are there because they break the Prometheus 2.0 promises. And actually, there is only one feature flag that I plan to remove. It is one which will be released tomorrow. And the rest, they just break Prometheus users in some way, which might be subtle or not, but it breaks the Prometheus 2.0 promise. So I don't think we should make them away unless you want to release Prometheus 3.x.
I'm not even saying that we need to get rid of them at all. I'm saying as quickly as possible and have a safety mechanism to get rid of them. But if you're not concerned about that, then we also don't need to do this. I thought you might be.
I mean, there are some that cannot go away by design unless we do a major release, right? But the A10 thing, in my idea, that would have been something we put it into feature flags so nobody will accidentally use it. But if you realize 1 or 2 releases down the road, this is great, we won't change it. We just make it a, like we say it's now a stable feature, remove the feature flag, and it's gone, right? And if people still use the feature flag, maybe, and this is what Richie said, is true, right? People will just cargo code using this flag, but at least it's not like required that you list this ginormous amount of feature flags to get the functionality you want. But we have avoided that situation where people use it accidentally. Like I still think I mean, in the end, Julian just said, it's good enough. We have thought so much about it. It's now a stable feature from the beginning. That's, of course, also a great outcome if we are so confident. But in general, exactly this thing, it's not breaking. It's an additional feature, but we might change the feature. And it might be used accidentally by users. This is where I think feature flags are also a good way, even if it's not a breaking feature. It's also a good way to kind of lock them away, and even if it's just for a month or 2 in the ideal case. But this is, I mean, this is a real thing. It's not like where we need a strict bureaucratic guideline, but if we say no, in this case, if we just generally prefer to declare the feature experimental, but not put it behind the feature flag, and if this is what most people here think, then fine with me, right? At least we know. Where we had this discussion just between Julian and me, and yeah, we had no clue what like the general thought about this would be. Yeah, and since nobody is saying anything, probably nobody feels strongly about it, and you don't even understand why we're talking about this.
I feel like leaning slightly towards making more use of feature flags, but then also reviewing them more often, yeah. So like kind of leaning a bit more into Björn's direction, I think.
I think my gut feeling is that yes, it would make sense probably to reevaluate more often whether a feature flag is useful or not, so that we don't carry them over and over. Either after a few months we decide that yes, this is useful, and we have good confidence that they provide value, then fine, we can enable them for everybody. Like I think Kubernetes has this kind of rule where when you have an alpha feature flag, then you need to reevaluate at regular intervals whether you want to progress or not, and drop it early rather than keeping it forever.
Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes is way more sophisticated, and I'm not suggesting we are doing exactly that, but it's perhaps an interesting insight that you could do this way more heavyweight and way more sophisticated than we do. I'm not
advocating either for some bureaucratic process. But
I mean, what I wrote in this last member thread, right? I quote myself, I would not go as far as making feature flags mandatory for each and every experimental feature, but I would suggest a policy of endowed use of feature flag. Or in other words, a feature flag should be the default for an experimental feature, and only if certain conditions are met, we can introduce it without a feature flag. For example, a feature that is unlikely to be used in an uninformed way, or we already have some confidence that nothing fundamental will change with the feature. But like nothing as a super fixed rule. But we just had completely different ideas, right? Julian was not even considering a feature flag for a feature that doesn't break anything. It's just experimental. The feature itself might change, right? Well, I thought this is a great use case for a feature flag. So we really had very different ideas about it.
So just FYI, I do actually care quite strongly about feature flags. I never got to replying, but I care quite strongly that we have them, because comparing to historic Prometheus, this is so much better. Do we need a call for consensus? I'm kind of trying to come up with something, and the consensus is we are happy that we have relatively many feature flags, but we intend to regularly clean them up and to give some self-care. Jan?
Yeah, maybe drilling down on that point, what does it practically mean to review them regularly, you know?
That's 6 months, every 2 minor releases. Every time the moon is full, we get to decide, like.
But I mean, I'm wondering how we can make sure that this doesn't fall under the table, essentially.
Perhaps the release shepherd could just do it. I mean, if there is a feature flag that is just there because it's a breaking change, it will not go away without a major release, right? So those are easy to review. And all those that could go away, there won't be that many, right? I think the release shepherd could just go over them and see, oh yes, we are actually doing this all the time. And then have a quick discussion if that should be graduated. And this is also what I wrote. Like we had this before when we just had experimental features. We didn't have a registry of experimental features, so we would usually never review them, and then realize, okay, now we have a whole industry built on an experimental feature, and we cannot change it anyway. So it's better, I think, if we are ahead of the curve and could say, okay, this is now a stable feature before the whole industry makes it a stable feature for us.
There are actually like 2 feature flags, which if we remove them would need to be turned into regular flags. So is that something that we want to say, okay, the feature flags are only experimental, and when they move stable, for example, for the remote write receiver, then we need to put that behind the regular flag, or we just keep the feature flag forever?
I absolutely think that we should also graduate experimental flags into real flags. I don't think that everything which is hidden behind a feature flag needs to be put into main binary just so. We get, like, maybe we are overcomplicating this, but assume you're reviewing the feature flags and you see that one thing should be made into a thing. It's not prescribed which way this goes. The whole thing can go away. We can make it default, or we can mandate that it needs to be explicitly enabled.
I think what Julia means, if it then has to be explicitly enabled, we should keep the enabling way via the feature flag, because
yes,
otherwise we would again break people. Well, if we just make a feature, like let's say my A10 example, we just decide A10 is good. I mean, as we did now, right? But let's imagine we would have put it behind the feature flag, and the next release decided that's great, make it a stable feature. We would just have removed the whole feature flag code, and people could by the nature of feature flags that you can write any word into it and Prometheus will not error out. They could still provide it, but it would be a true no.
But isn't the answer just kind of self-evident that we must keep it because else we are breaking users, but we should still have some self-care? Like, for example, you startup, say, hey, you still use this as a feature flag, please use this other thing instead. Again, maybe have an info metric, blah, blah, blah.
In the case where you have to use the other flag, we can issue a warning. But in the case where it has just become a stable, always on feature, we could just let people use. I mean, we could always say this feature flag you're using, I'll accept it, but it's not doing anything. Right? Are we doing this? I think we're not doing this right now, right? If you say enable feature foobar, Prometheus will not warn you.
It will.
It will tell you foobar doesn't exist as a feature flag. Okay, I mean, but then we're already there, right? I mean, you could do something even better and say, this has been there once upon a time, but it's now a stable feature. You don't need a feature flag anymore. That would be different from, I don't even know about this feature flag. But yeah, details.
So let's try for consensus, because I think we actually have something. Okay, let's try this. This is super long, but it should hopefully just make it through. Julius? Julian done or okay? Okay, good. Consensus. We will continue to use feature flags as often as we will continue to use feature flags as often as we feel they are useful. We will review feature flags every even numbered minor version. We will have logging and _info metric inform users if they use stale feature flags. In case a feature flag graduates into a real flag, we accept the feature flag until the next major version, but warn the user. Ganesh?
You mentioned _info metric. Should we word it like that in the text?
You mean that word metrics? Yes, I wanted to write that in.
Okay.
While reading, I realized we needed.
I mean, I understood that we would support old stale feature flags forever if they turn to a real flag. I mean, I'm fine with what you wrote, but I think it's a difference from what.
Yeah, I don't think we need info metrics.
Let's discuss one at one time. So Björn, as to your point, I think major versions are a good time to clean up old stuff, and there is not much.
A major version. Sorry, yeah. Yes,
Okay.
of course. I didn't saw. I thought it's also minor version. Yeah, major version that happened like every 5 years. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Julian,
I retract my concern. I just didn't read this properly.
Julian, to your point, the cost of introducing such a metric is negligible, and it allows users to build alerting around it, to build dashboards around it. If they have a fleet of 500 Prometheus servers, they can get an overview of where their configuration is old and stale and needs to be updated. The cost to us and the general user seems so tiny as compared as to the convenience and stability which we give the wider community or the ecosystem. I strongly believe we need a lot more of those self-care things. I mean, if you're super concerned, we can maybe explore having this on the config or something page, and just
I see
warning.
the point in having a metric when you use an unknown feature flag, but a stale one. I mean, we should just have one for the unknown feature flags then, and not only the stale ones.
I disagree because of all the cargo culting. You're assuming expert users. I'm assuming users who don't really know what they're doing, and they copied something from Stack Overflow and it should work for them, and they should be confident in the changes which they're making. Reduce the mental overhead of users who are not certain what is happening. Don't make them insecure because they will never ever remove that thing from their config. And they will copy it to their friend and to their colleague, and it will just, and also it will make.
Yeah, but I don't think that having a metric will change anything about that. I just want to know if I think I've enabled the feature that not all my feature flags are taken into account directly.
I think it absolutely will, because at some point, hopefully, we'll have an alert which is shipped with Prometheus by default, which just looks for precisely this kind of info metric and sends you an alert with low severity that, hey, update your configuration.
Yeah, but why not doing that for all the unknown feature flags?
You can also do it for unknown. There's nothing to stop you from doing it for unknown on top. But for old ones, which can safely be removed, those were useful at some point, and someone inherits that configuration. They don't really know what they're doing. They don't have the time and or motivation to clean up. But if they know for a fact that these three things can be removed, it's removed from this ever forward cargo culting chain. That's my concern. We have too many users that we can assume that those things will not just spread forever. And then you have that thing where you always have this invocation, and someone on Reddit or Stack Overflow argues super strongly that you must have this one feature flag because every third blue moon, blah, 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 blah. That's the risk which I'm seeing.
But is it really different to say it's stale versus it doesn't do anything?
Yes, because the one is this is undefined, what are you doing? And the other is, yes, it was useful at some point, but as of right now, it can safely be removed.
Yeah, but this is why we have the logging.
Yeah, and you just said
otherwise it's like an event that you expose metric.
People use it because somebody on Stack Overflow said you really have to use it. But if Prometheus tells you this is not doing anything,
well, I don't agree, but I also don't think it's worth discussing it in depth. So if we flip this into, we will have logging to inform users if they use stale metrics. We will have logging and info metric to inform users if they have unknown feature flags. Is that something that feels overly precise, but it's also not worth discussing it endlessly? Does anyone disagree with doing it that way? So we don't
just say we want logging and an info metric about it and flesh out the details in the pull request. I
also
don't
fine
think that we need to nail it down to every single detail right here.
Okay. Let's try with this version. Julian, can you read it once? I'm going to mark the section so
we will continue to use feature flags as often as we need, as we feel they are useful. We will review feature flags.
No. I mean, just that one thing which is currently marked. If that's okay to you, course, if it is, then we can just have one call for okay. So consensus: we will continue to use feature flags as often as we feel they're useful. We will review feature flags every even-numbered minor version for every.
Why actually only every even-numbered version?
Yeah.
If you just tell the release shepherd step 1.5, look at the feature flags. Is everything worthy to be graduated and can be removed?
Totally fine. Okay, we will continue to use consensus. We will continue to use feature flags as often as we feel they're useful. We will review feature flags for every minor version. We will have logging and info metrics to inform users if they use unknown/stale feature flags. In case a feature flag graduates into a real flag, we accept the feature flag until the next major version, but warn the user. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing? Very good. So now we have a first, I think, but let's roll with it. That's a write-in by Jan. It's not been ranked, voted, or anything, but we don't have anything super urgent on the backlog. So any objections to just going to Jan's topic? Good. Jan?
Yeah, it's also quite low priority, and I didn't know there was a whole process for it.
Totally fine. Just go ahead.
Yeah. So Julian of a while ago pointed me at this, that we could replace the current VFS Gen stuff with embed, since that made it into Go 1.16. And the original motivation was to just get rid of that additional generate step. So I played around with it a little bit, and embed is quite a bit nicer to use. The issue initially was that VFS Gen internally gzips the static content, and embed does not. So that caused I think 10 megabyte increase in the binary. I since then added kind of a zip layer that does essentially the same thing, but then we again end up with an additional generate step because the static assets need to be zipped before building. Yeah, so I just wanted to get some feedback on that since it's been sitting for a while. I think it's still kind of a all right change, because yeah, just uses Go internal features, and the situation with the compression might improve at a later stage. And I think there's also, though I haven't explored that, there's now, since we control the when the content gets compressed or decompressed rather, I think there is also a path forward where we can actually serve the web content compressed to clients who can handle that. That's really it.
So I don't know if Julius has an opinion. I was wondering, did we get to the same binary size as we used to have before?
Yes. I mean, I didn't check if it was the byte exact, but it's at close enough within a megabyte, I think. Might be just the difference between what I have in the branch and what master is currently at.
So I am mostly looking at Julius, as he's mostly responsible.
I'm looking at the PR. I think my main concern was just that, yeah, the size. I don't mind too much either way how we embed files, as long as we don't blow up the binary even more. So if that concern has been taken care of, then all good with me, I think.
Cool. I'll update the PR because I think there is a conflict right now, and get some fresh numbers on the binary size and whatnot, and then we'll ping again.
Yep, just confirming that would be great.
Sounds good.
I just wonder if, while updating the PR, if you could maybe make that in a library somewhere, because I think that Thanos also started that work, and that could be useful for other people as well.
Sure. I think Alert Manager does something similar too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the push gateway and
Sounds good.
actually, like, you can even do the pull request in common, because we have at least 3 repositories using that. So in the Prometheus/common repository, we can have that there, and especially since it's only using standard Golang features, I would expect. So it's totally fine to be in common. It will not prod external dependency there. So
let me just double check that. Yeah, just standard Golang. Yep. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
thank you. Should we have a call for consensus?
I think the consensus is to get new numbers, which doesn't really need one. But if you want, we can run one.
No, let's just make sure that what we have spoken about is written down, and then.
Okay. Yeah, no. But again, if you want, we can easily have one. Looking at both the time or at the time who's in the call at the moment, and is Ben still here? No, he's not. Default port allocation page sounds as if it doesn't fit into 20 minutes, but we can try. There was also an open telemetry ask which of the scrape underscore metrics we would be considering to make mandatory at some point, so they can do this in on their compatibility side. Any which are required, or alert manager custom webhooks. Those are the 3. Anyone feel strongly about any of those?
I don't think Alert Manager will fit in the 20 minutes that's left. But we can discuss the default script metrics.
Okay. The things which I referred to in the voting doc is both of those are already closed, or one is closed, one is merged. But the question is still officially open. So Open Telemetry wanted to know which of the scrape underscore metrics we would be considering to make mandatory for Prometheus compatibility at some point. Like if any of those are important enough that we always want to have them. And I mean, we also don't need to decide either way. If we decide to make them, everyone gets at least 2 minor versions of advance warning anyway, and I'm in the weekly call with them. So if anything changes, it's not as if this would be coming like as a surprise. There will be ample of time, so we don't have to decide. But if anyone feels strongly about any of them, you're also more than welcome to say that we should.
Well, I generally think that if they actually scrape something, that they should have the scrape duration, because that's just generally useful, but I don't think we should really impose them any specific metric, except the up one, which is kind of used to do the basic monitoring. But the other ones, I would still recommend them to have the ones that make sense for them, but I would not force anyone to use any of those, to have any of those metrics.
So regarding up, that's already part of the compatibility test suite or the compliance tests. So that's handled, same as staleness. Of course, those are obviously or self-evidently important.
So something which is important regarding those metrics is that they cannot be relabeled, so they must match what's in the Prometheus UI. And that's something that we should make sure that the behavior is the same as Prometheus. Like, you can change any metrics, but not those metrics. They cannot be altered. They always match the target that you are scraping. They can also not be dropped. So they really go beyond the relabeling anyway.
Which is already imposing quite a few constraints on it, which is totally fine, and which is part of why this came up. I mean, my own gut is that scrape duration is something which is extremely valuable for debugging and such. We can also consider making those not test failures but recommended, that you get a warning if you don't have them. As to not changing them, that's absolutely fair. We just need to find a consensus on this and write it down. Does anyone else have opinions? Because else we can just try for a consensus and see if that goes through.
I would also note to the OpenTelemetry people that we also have extra scrape metrics that we plan to introduce in Prometheus 3.0, but that are available behind the feature flag, which are also useful to do more alerting.
Yes, can do. That's outside the scope of compliance, I guess, but can absolutely do. Maybe it makes sense to define scrape underscore as a reserved key space for Prometheus as part of compliance. Because that makes it easier to impose any future restrictions or anything on. For example, you cannot relabel them or something. That we bless them as reserved.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to ask that if they use scrape underscore, that must match the semantics of Prometheus.
I mean, specification-wise, that is what reserved means. We define stuff which exists within this namespace, and anything which is not defined is by definition only for us to define. Which seems fair, and also, like, if anyone watching this recording, if anyone wants to propose something, then by all means do, and then we define how it works across all of Prometheus and ensure compatibility, even if Prometheus server were to not use it. Okay. Consensus. We are reserving the scrape underscore namespace. Scrape underscore metrics are recommended, but not required. If they are present, they must be tied to a specific target and cannot be relabeled or otherwise detached from said target. If present, their value must not change. I think that reflects.
Isn't that a breaking change?
Is it? I don't know. I wouldn't be aware of any.
I mean, like people may have scrape metrics, right? That they invented.
Okay, fair, but as long as we don't
Yes.
error out. I mean,
Yeah, no, Julius is right that it's a breaking change. And also, we do not even ourselves add new ones now. So
Yeah, exactly. Like never really thought about it, but any scrape underscore metric that we add is a breaking change for our users.
which
I
is
mean,
why we don't add them.
documentation-wise,
Yeah.
we can say that they are reserved, but not considered breaking until the next major version. And then we on the compliance level, this is a warning, not a must, and done. But that's also not a consideration for anything like a collector, which is the OpenTelemetry use case. That is a consideration for an emitter client library or something. I mean, yeah, that's also the OpenTelemetry use case. We can also just not reserve the namespace. I like the idea, but I mean, the way to heal this in specification land is to reserve it, but not make it an error until 3.
Yeah, I think it would be strange to reserve it because they don't have a namespace, actually.
They do, of course, we just wrote that it's a namespace, but we can also say prefix or whatever.
Well, by namespace, I mean they don't start with Prometheus underscore, for example.
I changed the prefix, but we can also completely remove that one sentence.
But I think we should reserve the ones that we have now, yes.
Okay, we are reserving. Gotham, you need to click away because I can't. No, you need to click out of the text because else I can't. Thank you. We are reserving. Let's try this, and we can also simply drop the second sentence. Consensus. The scrape underscore metrics we currently have are well defined. We intend to reserve the scrape underscore prefix with the next major version. Scrape underscore metrics are recommended but not required. If they are present, they must be tied to a specific target and cannot be relabeled or otherwise detached from said target. If present, their value must not be changed.
Should we specify that those metrics can still be scraped in case of federation or that kind of things?
I think that's covered because I intended to cover this use case with saying that you cannot relabel or otherwise detach from the target, which specifically does not prohibit a federation use case or external labels or what have you.
I would feel more confident if we just change the word if they are present by if they are added.
Which,
That one.
you mean if they're added, they must be added feels poorly defined.
Because they can be present from a federation endpoint that you would fetch metrics from, and not be tied to a specific target then, because it comes from federation.
Yes, but through the labels which are already attached to that scrape metric, they are tied to a specific target. It doesn't matter if it goes to 1 or 20 Prometheus servers through federation in between. That's the point. It's still tied to a target. It doesn't mean that that target has been scraped by that server.
Okay, I guess it can work.
I mean, if it's unclear, we should make it clearer. But I feel as if this is clear.
Well, it feels like they should drop it if there is no up metrics attached to it.
Up is a requirement of Prometheus. If you don't have up metrics or staleness handling, you're not Prometheus compatible.
Okay.
Because precisely of all of those problems and considerations and waterfall effects, those are hard requirements. Okay, but given this, is this text okay, or should I rephrase it to try and make it clearer? Ah, wait, I can actually make it a lot clearer. They must. If we say if they are present, they must not be detached from their respective targets.
It does not say that you cannot enable them. Then.
Yes, which doesn't matter in this case, because if you change anything in flight which is not target relevant, for example, external label, we don't care.
Well, it does change because Prometheus does not allow you to change them.
Fair. Then we just keep the original version. So is this okay for you, Julian, as written now?
Yes.
Okay, then just to make certain, I'm going to read it out again. Consensus. The scrape metrics we currently have are well defined. We intend to reserve the scrape metrics prefix with the next major version. Scrape underscore metrics are recommended but not required. If they are present, they must be tied to a specific target and cannot be relabeled or otherwise detached from said target. If present, their value must not be changed. All agreed? Anyone disagreeing?
I agree. Just in the concept, in the conformance use case, would that be? Should we write that it should be a shoot, or what should be the verb there?
What specific?
The recommended. The recommended. So is that a shoot?
What?
The to have those metrics, those scrape metrics.
They are not even recommended currently. I know they are recommended. Yeah, they are recommended but not required. So it's not a failure if you don't have them. But if you have them, you cannot change them.
So it's a
not
can. So it's a can then.
It's a should. You should have them.
Okay.
And if you have them, you must not change them.
Okay.
Okay. So just to make certain, all agreed, no one disagreeing, correct? Good. Well, looks good. We have 5 minutes left. So let's discuss Prometheus 4.0. Or we end 5 minutes early. Or does anyone have a small thing at the end? No? Then everyone gets a huge amount of time, precisely 4.4 minutes and 15 seconds back, which I think is a first for those calls. We are not overrunning, we're underrunning. See you. Thank you.
You
See you all.
All right, thanks
See you
everyone.
next
Bye.
month.